I'm here in Anaheim, California, visiting the historic Anaheim Cemetery, which is the oldest public burial ground in all of Orange County. And like many California cities, Anaheim's humble beginnings are rooted in the Old West. The founding of Anaheim is actually quite interesting. Now, in the 1850s, a group of about 50 German families from San Francisco moved to this area, and they had the goal of creating the world's largest vineyard. So in 1857, they purchased about 1,200 acres here where modern-day city of Anaheim is, and began to create vineyards and began to grow grapes. In 1858, stockholders decided to name their new city Anaheim, which means home by the Santa Ana River. Now, in those early days, most families just buried their dead at the corner of their vineyards. But in 1866, the Anaheim Cemetery was established, and in July 1867, its first burial took place. One interesting bit of history about Anaheim and what the settlers did here is, again, as mentioned, they did start growing grapes and did create one of the largest vineyards around. In 1885, a fungus disease did destroy most of their crops, and they pivoted and began growing Valencia oranges. This beautiful stone archway we're walking up to was dedicated in 1917 to Anaheim Cemetery and the early pioneers that settled this town. It actually marks the original entrance to the cemetery, which today is on Sycamore Street on the opposite end of the cemetery. But it really is quite a beautiful piece of architecture. It's got 3 archways here, and it also has a plaque on the inside of this far arch talking about how it was dedicated in 1917. One of the graves here that I've been looking forward to visiting is that of lawman and peace officer Charles Lehman. Now, he was killed on July 23, 1872, and was the first peace officer in Anaheim that was killed. And right now I am in search of his grave. All right, it looks like it is right here. So this is the final resting place of lawman Charles F. Lehman. Now, obviously, this is a more modern monument, and from what I read, his original wooden monument headstone was destroyed or damaged or taken over the years. So in July of 1995, this was rededicated by the local police as a memorial to Charles F. Lehman. Of course, many of the local newspapers covered the killing of Constable Lehman. One read, "David Davies, a constable of this township and a man giving his name as Horton, were playing cards last Sunday at the Anaheim Brewery. About 6 p.m. a dispute arose as to the winnings. Horton took the checks and Davies seized the money. Horton immediately grabbed Davies' revolver and the latter as promptly secured another. The parties commenced firing and the fight was transferred to the street and thence to the vacant lot between the brewery and Macy's harness shop. Here, Charles F. Lehman, also a constable of this township and late marshal of the city, interfered as a peace officer to quell the disturbance and received a fatal shot through the body. Horton ran away and was pursued by an excited crowd who soon captured him in Mr. Lorenz's vineyard and lodged him in jail. Mr. Lehman was taken into the drugstore of Dr. Higgins and thence to the residence of Mrs. Brown, where he expired at 7:30 p.m., Tuesday the 23rd. It had been generally supposed that Horton fired the fatal shot, but Mr. Lehman declared that Davies shot him and remained firm in his statement up to the time of his death. Now, this is the grave of John F. Marquis. He was born in Pennsylvania on April 26, 1841, and when he was in his 20s, he actually was living in Illinois, which is where he enlisted in the Union Army as a bugler. He mustered in at Camp Butler on December 31st with the Illinois Battery K, 2nd Light Artillery Regiment. And over the next 2 years, he fought mostly in the Western theater of the war. He was in Columbus, Kentucky, Memphis, Tennessee, and Clarkston, Missouri. And that's where they actually fought a few hundred rebels that were occupying the city of Clarkston. And in May of 1863, his regiment was ultimately serving under General Ulysses S. Grant during the siege of Vicksburg. So John here saw some of the worst parts of the war in the Western theater, and he eventually headed west, like most families after the Civil War. Marquis ended up here in Anaheim, California, where he lived, but sadly he died of consumption, which is today really known just as tuberculosis, on May 1st, 1882. And he was interred here at Anaheim Cemetery, and today we can see his headstone, labeled Lieutenant John F. Marquis, Company K of the 2nd Illinois Light Artillery. And it appears next to John here is actually another Civil War veteran, John William Hune, who fought in Company F of the 17th Missouri Infantry. Born 1844, so again, just another one of the young men who went to fight for the Army, and he died on October 17th, 1929, presumably out here in Anaheim, again buried here next to John Marquis. Back here in the corner of the cemetery is another monument I wanted to make sure I took the time to visit. Now, Anaheim, like many cities and towns out here in the West at that time, had a large Chinese population. Of course, they had their own Chinatown where everyone lived together. A lot of those Chinese individuals that lived here in Anaheim were laborers, mostly agricultural laborers. And today, there's actually a monument here at Anaheim Cemetery. And it says, "The grove of Don redwood trees was planted by the Orange County Cemetery District as a memorial to the people of Chinese heritage interred in the Anaheim Cemetery. This species of tree was thought to be extinct until they were rediscovered growing in China in 1948. At this time, it is the only grove of Don redwoods known to exist in California, and this marker was placed in September of 1989. And one thing I do remember reading is that though an unknown number of Chinese people were buried here, the exact names and locations here is not necessarily known. So today, again, they have this beautiful grove of Don redwood trees in the corner as a memorial to those folks. Now I'm back here in that grove of Don redwoods, and it really is very peaceful back here. They have a nice bench, and you can also get a good view of the entire cemetery from here. And a lot of these historic parts, it's not that big of a cemetery. A lot of these historic grave sites and parts are all kind of back here on the back wall. Again, basically near this arch where the original entrance was, which makes a lot of sense. I'm coming up on one of the graves that I've been looking forward to visiting the most, and that is the grave of Reverend Ezra Benedict Kellogg. Now, he is a veteran of the War of 1812 and one of only 8 known War of 1812 veterans buried in the entire state of California. So it's pretty special to be able to visit here and pay my respects. Now, Ezra was born on July 24th, 1795 in New York, and he went on to serve in the New York militia during the War of 1812. Unfortunately, I haven't really been able to find a lot of details about what he has done. I do know that he served in Captain Thaddeus Sheldon's company, so I'm sure I could do a little more research to see what engagements or where he might have been or where he might have camped out at throughout the war. But at some point, he moved west to California and became an Episcopal minister. Now, he founded St. Michael's Episcopal Church here in Anaheim, which still stands to this day. He died on February 7th, 1878 in Anaheim at the age of 82, and of course is buried here at Anaheim Cemetery. And what's neat is they finally did place a new marker here for Ezra Benedict Kellogg. Again, it reads, Captain Thaddeus Sheldon's Company, New York Militia, War of 1812. Of course, they also have the War of 1812 placard here, placed by the California Society of the U.S. Daughters of 1812. Which is really neat to see. And the fact that he's only one of 8 War of 1812 veterans buried here in California is pretty special. And I remember reading there's actually only one known veteran of the American Revolution buried here in California, which I believe is actually up in Sonoma. So hopefully one day I can make it up there to visit their gravesite. Other than Reverend Ezra Kellogg's bronze placard and stuff we see on the ground, of course, we do have a somewhat more modern stone monument to him with the cross on top. And it's quite beautiful. Again, you can see the inscription. It reads, Reverend Ezra Benedict Kellogg, born July 24th, 1795, died February 7th, 1878. And it's just such a beautiful, peaceful location. You can see the 1917 archway there in the distance, and it's just been really enjoyable to be able to come here and pay my respects to a lot of the early founders of the city of Anaheim, and of course veterans like Reverend Kellogg. And he's one of about 500 or so veterans from the War of 1812 through the American Civil War, all the way up through World War II and beyond, that are buried here at Anaheim Cemetery. Anaheim Cemetery is one of the many historic resting places all throughout California, but this one's pretty special to me. The fact that, you can just see a lot of the settlers and those early German families buried here, on the very land that they purchased and they tried to build the world's largest vineyard on. It's just amazing to see kind of the roots of this town, a city that's so much larger than it was then, of course, to see kind of the humble beginnings, and then also to be able to visit the grave of a veteran of the War of 1812 is incredibly special. And it's just been nice to walk around here, walk amongst the grove of the redwoods and the other trees and native plants, and just kind of spend an afternoon here. The story of Anaheim is the story of America. Dozens of immigrant families sought a better life and new economic opportunities. Politicians, farmers, marshals, and veterans made up the community. And while many found success in Anaheim, others met their end. Now it is up to us to tell their story.